Hi, everyone. Welcome to the live series podcast. I'm your host here today, Dominic Taylor. So we run these podcasts with those within the software engineering space, ERP and cloud and DevOps. The reason why we run these podcasts is to really embed ourselves within the community and to provide an opportunity for professionals like those you see on the screen to really connect and network and provide an opportunity for everyone to learn and share the latest insights. Now, today we'll be discussing all things around NetSuite best practices and specifically targeting administration. And the guests that we have today are all from started as administrators and now propelled their careers right up to director level. And Jay and Shalakay now kind of having their own consultancy. So yeah, really excited to host this. I'm really excited to hear some of the insights that the guests can share. But without further ado, I'm sure you guys are sick of hearing from me. I'm going to pass you on to our guests to introduce themselves. So let's start with Samarth. Do you want to give us a bit of an insight into yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And my name is Samarth Rajendra. I have been working with Kayak Software Corporation for about 9.5 to 10 years now. And my introduction to NetSuite happened around 5.5 to 6 years ago when we first implemented it. So a lot of learnings coming from that and hopefully some that I could help share today.
Awesome. Now we'll move on to Shalakay.
Hi, I'm Shalakay. Thanks for having me on this podcast. I'm really excited to learn from your other presenters and also to share some insights. I'm Shalakay Gibbs. I'm the owner and operator of SuiteSciens, Inc. SuiteSciens, Inc. is a NetSuite Alliance partner, and we are keenly focused on helping customers that sit at the intersection of software and manufacturing. We help them mainly by serving as their outsourced NetSuite administrator, but we go beyond the walls of NetSuite and also support built for NetSuite applications and really ensure that these customers are thinking about governance, risk and compliance, access controls, and system audits, and all the things that are exciting to NetSuite administrators as they grow and scale their business.
Awesome. Exciting. And Jay?
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Jay Jordan. I've been using NetSuite for almost 10 years now. I started as an analyst looking at a bunch of different CRMs and ERPs, and I liked NetSuite so much I decided to specialize. And so my past 3 roles, I have been an official NetSuite administrator for a variety of different companies. Now I find myself at a small consultancy and just love helping share all of my knowledge about NetSuite with people from a variety of industries.
Brilliant. We'll dive straight into our first question of the day. So Shalakay's question to the group was, what are some key considerations when integrating NetSuite with other business systems or third-party applications? Jay, since you're on my screen right now, do you want to take the way?
Sure thing. First thing is seeing what data you want on a regular basis and what things you'd want to query and what data you'll need to have for shared keys. So that will determine what webhooks are available with this application and this other integration, what data will we want to have regularly pulled and updated in our system to reduce back and forths or to have statuses and things, and then what things can we use with webhooks, and all of those are based on keys and system identifiers. So that's your foundation, and everything else you can pull in from there.
Brilliant, brilliant. Samarth?
Yeah, I think to add to Jay's point, I would probably also start off very early in the conversation to see if what you're trying to integrate, the system, whether it has a built-in suite bundle. I think a lot of times companies can save time if there's an actual official add-on that's made available in the marketplace when thinking about integrations, and that might also help solve a lot of the issues because obviously, multi-million-dollar companies, they put a lot of effort into building their products and they wanted to talk to as many systems as possible. So if they have a native built-in solution for something that you're trying to integrate and exchanging data for, I would be curious to always evaluate what that does, what it doesn't do, and then, kind of start thinking along the lines of, okay, if it doesn't do something that we really need, how do we augment that? because we've made the decision to go with this auxiliary system.
Yeah, brilliant. And I know it's your question, Shalakay, but what are your thoughts?
Yes, I agree with everything that has been said so far. But I also like to consider what is the current state of the data that you're about to integrate, right? Thinking about what is going to be your system of record once this integration is established, and making sure that the data is harmonized and is transferable is really, really important. So don't skip the data transformation step, and also making sure that you have clean data. In the NetSuite community, we like to say garbage in, garbage out, right? So we want to make sure that we have clean data to integrate. In addition to that, I like to think about security and compliance. I see a lot of people integrating data using a NetSuite administrator role when that level of security is not necessary for the data integration to work. What you want to do is to make sure that you have access to the tables that are necessary for that integration and no more, right? Because we don't want backdoor integration feeds leaking data out to the public. That creates a big compliance issue, especially as you want to grow, scale, bring on investors, and also maybe go public one day. It's a huge compliance risk and violation, and you want to make sure that you're protecting your organization against this.
Brilliant, brilliant. It's interesting that you mentioned going public one day. Obviously, Samarth was working for a publicly traded company as well, so we'll kind of dive into those topics soon. Shalakay's second question was, how do you handle security and compliance? I know you've just kind of touched on it there within NetSuite, particularly with regard to user roles and permissions. So reverse order this time. Jay, do you want to? Actually, I think you went first last time. So Sam, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think Shalakay hit a very good point, right? Because when you think about compliance and what the risks are, especially if you are thinking about going public and you're going to fall into SOC scope, it is always granting the least level of access that is necessary and the least amount of information that's necessary for that exchange of data to be successful. And I think what risk and compliance teams, both internal and external auditors, always look at is privileged access. Anything that is admin related is always called into scope no matter what. And who has access to that becomes very important. So now you also need to think about, okay, if I'm setting up an integration with an admin level role, where am I going to store the credentials? Who has access to those credentials? So this is when, password management softwares like 1Password and LastPass come into play. And all of a sudden, you now need to include those applications into scope. Who has access to 1Password? Who has access to that vault? So it kind of has this cascading effect where you could potentially avoid that scenario by saying this is a non-privileged role. This API user that's used in this integration to, process data between two systems only has access to this level of information. It's only syncing expenses. It's only syncing transactions, whatever it might be, right? I think always the least level of access is preferred. And I think, even when thinking about general user management and user permissioning, I like to always have that constant eye on SOX compliance because I know what it's like to kind of get these questions 6 months, 8 months, sometimes even a year down the line saying, why did you do that? Well, one, you might have a hard time recalling why you did that a whole year after, the event has happened. So now you have to kind of rely on muscle memory and rely on, audit trail notes and, go back to your email saying, okay, what was the request? Why did this action take place? Why did I go in and do this? So you can kind of form a story around it. So I think in general, it's always good practice to leave breadcrumb trails behind. If there's a ticket, especially that outlines where the request came from and whether it had approval from someone either in a management position or someone who perhaps even is just a manager of that person requesting access, right? That approval always goes a long way in showing that we had done our due diligence and that there is an actual approval for this action, that you didn't just go and unilaterally act on this. So breadcrumb trails and approvals, tickets, emails, always helpful.
Brilliant. And lastly, Jay?
I take off my can-do problem-solving firefighter hat and put on my mature corporation implementing a project hat. I would definitely say having all of the flowcharts and understanding of not just system roles and responsibilities, but human roles and responsibilities definitely come into play. And then that trickles down to what roles are given, even for a connector user. Do you allow them to have full access with writing and deleting sales orders? Well, it comes from this other upstream system. So maybe just create is all that's necessary. Maybe edit, things like that. And so then with the big picture sketches of flowcharts down to specific processes and for specific functionality requirements, I definitely have had my share of mapping to tickets and to referencing document abbreviations and things like that. And so that's another great way to, 2-5 years down the line, try to have some hope of referencing what you were talking about years before. And then that also gives the shape of how the integration is designed, what the capabilities are, what the scope of the credentials are for secure keys and such things like that.
Awesome.
All shaped from.
Yeah, there seems to be lots of synchronicity between you all, but obviously you've all got completely different, I guess, careers working for different companies. So from my own perspective, I'd be interested to hear how you've all kind of learned this, if that makes sense. Yeah, Shalakay, could you go first?
Well, for me, a lot of it is trial by fire. Back in 2000, and I believe it was 2005 or 2006. Sorry, I jumped that by 10 years. 2015 or 2016. I'm very old, so I mixed.
You don't look it.
Thank you. So back then, I was served as a NetSuite development manager, managing the entire NetSuite and financial systems team for a company that was in the process of going public on NetSuite.
Right.
And at that point in time, way back in the 2015s, 2016s, this was one of the earlier companies that went public on NetSuite. So a lot of the things that we had to learn or to be able to document in terms of segregation of duty, compliance, a lot of the information was not there. NetSuite itself had been the first company to go public on NetSuite, and I believe that they did that in the 00s. So less than 10 years before we went public on NetSuite. I think it was probably even in the teens as well, maybe 2010, 2011, but not much earlier than the organization that I worked at was going public on NetSuite. And we had a very difficult time with our auditors proving that access was limited to certain things by, well, this person has access here, but we have, an approval workflow that restricts the access in that way. And so I have learned throughout my career working with now multiple publicly traded companies that operate on NetSuite, how important documentation is. And I'm going to plug one of my partners because they have been a savior for me in terms of documentation and synchronizing we use Jira in a lot of our companies, Jira ticket management with the actual customization in NetSuite and that strong point. It is very, very a really amazing tool in terms of your being able to prove to an auditor that you have met those compliance standards. And, as my colleague said earlier, proving and remembering and recalling and having that documentation around why that change was made, what approvals we received from the business in order to make that change. And so for me, as I said, trial by fire. That's a very long way to answer a simple question.
No, that's awesome. Has it been the same for you as well, Jay?
More or less, under the shade of higher managers than I, getting my feet wet with administration. getting some early autonomy, making decisions or handling a small piece of a project, meeting with what I thought was a comprehensive panel of stakeholders, then to find that there was someone else that should have been involved, but the cat was already let out of the bag, so to speak. And so then things about, oh, well, actually, that shouldn't be able to do that, and we'll have to reel that back in, or we'll have to remove that permission. That's kind of one side. Another side would be looking at something, an auditor saying, this actually needs to have its scope reduced, and then having to work backwards and figure out, well, some other consultant implemented that years ago with the default administrator permission, but what does this do now exactly? I guess we have to dig in and figure out what was happening there in the first place, and coming up with all of that documentation and permission by permission, removing things and setting them to their appropriate levels.
Yeah, totally. And what's been your learning curve then, Samarth?
Yeah, no, I think first thing, I think Shalakay mentioned a very good application that I'm myself a huge proponent of. I think StrongPoint is great in this field. I helped to implement that at our company 4 years ago actually, on NetSuite, and 3 years ago in Salesforce. And I think they're doing really good work, and they kind of understand these pain points of a lot of system administrators and even folks in the audit world, right? Where it's all about how you prove something. It can all be about good intentions, but at the end of the day, if you can't prove it, unfortunately, you might end up taking a ding on it, and it turns into a deficiency, which no one wants, even if you followed all the rules and followed all the procedures. So I think, having been burnt like that a few times is really what forced me to kind of look into a system that's foolproof, that's just there, it's black and white. And I was a huge proponent of implementing StrongPoint within our organization. I actually also helped to implement Audit Board, which was called SOX Hub back then, which made things a whole lot easier to track in terms of, control ownership, who's performing the control, what's the evidence, right? What's the file that's being loaded? Is it consistent every iteration that you need to do it, whether it's a quarterly control or a semi-annual control, whatever it is? StrongPoint just augmented that very well. And once you introduce StrongPoint to our external auditors, and they knew that, these records were immutable, that, it's just always running in the background. And if it's something that's identified as compliant or non-compliant, sure, there might be some false positives there that we might need to look into, but overall, it just makes having a conversation a lot easier.
Perfect. And moving on to Samarth's next question. So, as you've already stated, so you were working for a publicly traded company for quite some time in Kayak, starting off as a NetSuite admin, working your way right to director. So Samarth would like to know, how do non-public companies approach NetSuite in NetSuite administration? So to kick us off with that one, we'll start with Jay this time around.
I'd say it determines how ambitious or stringent you are with grooming your backlog. It determines how much you need to have a full test suite and need to have full requirements up front, or can you just iteratively begin creating value and starting small with a solution? So I'd say I've had different scales of decision criteria on what comes next. Yeah, having the just more flexible iterative approach, even with like a startup experience, was pretty fun, but then could get burned later, of course, as you can imagine.
Yeah, there's a lot of burning today. And moving on to Shalakay.
Yeah, so I like to think of it in terms of what is the goal of the organization, right? You may have a company that has no ambition of ever going public, of no ambition of ever bringing in PE funds that would require more stringent audits, right? They're going to be a small company. It's owned by, maybe a few partners, and it's going to completely be run internally with no external funding that they really have to prove audit, right? A company like that, whose goal is to keep things at a certain size and a certain level of compliance, they may not need meet all of the compliance requirements, that they are going to need, 3 different versions of the sandboxes and different development environments and robust version release testing and all of these things. They have a faster and loose standard. But when you start your startup, and if you have established your business plan and you say, I want to scale to a place where I'm going on Shark Tank within 5 years to get investor funding, well, you will need to prove what's going on with your books. You will need to prove that your statements, your financial system is auditable by a publicly traded audit company, and that you have met certain standards and there is no risk of leakage through fraud or anything like that. So you want to start with a compliance system. It is way easier to start with a compliance system, even if you're not going public, than it is to become compliant while you're doing operations, because everybody is already used to the NetSuite administrator role. They're used to being able to do everything. I have gone into organizations where there have been 12 to 15 NetSuite administrators, and none of them want to give up the NetSuite administrator role because everybody needs it, right? They need it. They have to have it. So it is really hard. It becomes really difficult to roll people back off those higher levels of permission into a more appropriate level of permission. So if your goal is to get there one day, start the right way. If you are planning to have a smaller organization, you're going to scale, maybe your revenue is high, but your team size is going to be low and you're going to have people that have to wear multiple hats, I would say still consider segregation of duties. Document it somewhere. Say, this is an exception. This person needs to process ARAP, they need to enter vendors, they need to all of this permission. And we have a safe search running in the background that monitors for whether or not this person is unscrupulously changing vendor addresses to send a checks to their house, right? Take care of it with a search and document it. However, if you plan to scale to be auditable, you want to start the right way.
Yeah, that makes total sense, building that foundation from the beginning. I guess for our guests, you could tell us the alternative, what was the approach working within a publicly traded company?
I think, to already start off in a publicly traded company, it kind of immediately exposes you to the control environment and what it takes to succeed and make sure that you're staying compliant, because ultimately, we're publicly traded, but we're also accountable. And when you're accountable, you have to start doing certain things and certain procedures, even if that might be difficult to follow at certain times. A lot of times, organizations just are not big enough to have segregation of duties in place. And even at my previous company, it was in a scenario for that for many years like that, where the intention was to have segregation of duties, but guess what? The finance team is not that big enough, and you might need to have certain individuals who are wearing multiple hats, and sometimes they might collide in terms of what they have access to in the system. So at that point, documentation becomes super important, and keeping things consistent in terms of that documentation, in terms of role provisioning, especially as the team starts to grow larger, it helps to really keep the cleanliness of your user and your role environment. So, we had to do user access reviews on a quarterly basis. We just got used to that. So when you start to do things like that, where, you evaluate, does this user need access? What exactly is their job responsibility? Okay, so let's take that to the next step. What roles do they have? Do they have more than one? And if they have more than one, do they conflict with each other in terms of what permissions they're actually providing? You could have an AP analyst and someone who's also applying cash and be a cash analyst. Or like the example I think Shalakay gave, you could have someone doing both AR and AP, and clearly that's a conflict there. But if you have that documented saying this is the reason why we have this conflict, we have the approval from the CFO and maybe even the controller to proceed, as long as there's an extra review happening on that person's work, that's how we're able to mitigate that risk. And I think to keep a track record of that and keep it consistent makes, conversations go a lot smoother, which even external auditors I've found are fine with. What really kind of gets you in trouble, I feel, is just the attitude of, let me just go in there and fix that one thing, right? Let me just go in there and be that, go-getter. And I think that's great, but if you're not following the procedures, if you don't have that ticket, if you don't have that approval, it's just going to come back and bite you, even though your intentions were honest and good. Auditors unfortunately don't care for that.
Brilliant. And we've kind of touched on your second question there, but you did ask, how do non-public companies handle certain requests in comparison to publicly traded companies? I know we've sort of touched on it, but does anyone have any further insights on that at all? Maybe start with you this time, Shalakay.
Can you repeat the tail end of the question?
How do non-public companies process certain requests within NetSuite in comparison to publicly traded companies?
So I think if you have a strong NetSuite administrator who knows not just NetSuite, a good NetSuite administrator understands business and the nature of business and business risks, right? They are a steward, they're a protector of the company. So yes, they need to know NetSuite, that goes without saying, but they also need to know where all the bodies can be buried. They need to know how to find where leakage can happen in terms of fraud and risk and compliance and all of that. And so if you have a strong NetSuite administrator and they understand the nature of risk and they understand the riskiness of the request, they should be able to make a sound judgment in terms of what requests to process urgently and what requests I might need to go a level up and say, hey, somebody's asking me to export our entire sales database. Is that something that you want them to do with all the addresses and the phone numbers so that they can take it to their next company? It's something that you might say, hey, that request seems a little bit suspicious. Let me move that up the flagpole and make sure that someone is notified. I encourage every NetSuite administrator, whether or not the company will pay for a ticketing system, to establish some sort of ticketing system. Many, many free tools exist. Monday.com, Asana. Yes, they're truly project management system. Use them as your ticketing system, right? This is what is going to keep you out of the hot seat in terms of being able to prove that you followed procedure. One, you established a procedure, because sometimes no procedure exists, and you followed that procedure that you established, and you have full communication within the organization, and you did everything that you could do to be a good steward, and you are told to proceed with the request. Then you go ahead and proceed.
Great, great. And Jay?
Well, I haven't worked for a publicly traded company. If I think of a continuum of highest scrutiny to funding for support of the IT departments, I think what I've seen is a spectrum of emphasis on people and sort of quality of life, and then on the other end, technological performance and optimization. And I think the best opportunities that I've had for processing requests has been when there's been a synergy of a perfect NetSuite function to address both at the same time. That doesn't always happen, but NetSuite understands a lot of these common business processes, and it's the theory that if you can just use NetSuite as designed, you won't have any problems. But then, of course, there's always some tailoring and mending required to get things to fit appropriately. Again, wearing the hat of being very scrupulous on the exact ROI for a change versus how often so-and-so clerk uses this feature and there's this weird glitch that happens. That's sort of the range and balance that I've seen, and the intersection being what tools does NetSuite provide that you can use, and I found a lot of good ones.
Yeah, brilliant. And what did it look like from your perspective, Sam, working within a publicly traded company?
Yeah, I think a lot of the points were also touched on previously as well. But I think to add to that, right, I think to add to the concept of good stewardship, I think a really strong NetSuite administrator always challenges, right? I don't think they should ever hesitate to challenge a request for access on, what exactly they're looking for. And also if that's a request that could potentially be just a temporary one, right? Someone might have just come across a piece of information that they need access to in NetSuite. They might not need recurring access, so they just put in a request for NetSuite access. The good NetSuite administrator will always challenge and say, can you give me some more information on why you need that? And what exactly are you trying to access? And is that something that's better served with a save search that I could run for you? So I think I can't tell you enough times of not only having that one eye on vendor management and how many licenses we're using up, because that's something that I constantly had to do because I owned that budget of how many licenses do we have? Do we need more? That was a constant thing that I had in the back of my mind that I had to always think about before I said, this person can have access. I don't think we should give this person access. And it most times related to either they needed it very briefly or it turns out they think they need NetSuite access, but they actually don't. They can get that piece of information elsewhere. So I think just doing the good policing always helps. And again, I think having things like quarterly reviews and establishing a process for granting access, ticketing system, like Shalakay was mentioning, very, very effective in showing the intent, in showing the request, in showing approvals. So having something like Jira or even Service Desk or really any one of the ticketing platforms and standardizing across the company that says, if you need access to NetSuite, you have to submit a ticket. That can sometimes be a little bit, fluid, and it can even come through, let's say, a Slack request or an email. But as good NetSuite administrators, it's also our duty to say, okay, if that email came in and it already has an approval, let me just convert that into a ticket. And it can be a simple task of copy pasting that into a ticket. So you can always go and look that up, 6 months down the line when the auditor picks out that sample and it just so happens to be that one request that you worked on, which has happened a number of times as well. So it makes your life easier to do policing well.
Yeah. Do you find that was done kind of automatically, or is it something you needed to constantly instill?
I think I had to instill that in myself to be able to then instill into others. So
Right.
I had to be good about that first before I would expect the same thing from my teammates.
Yeah, I can imagine. Brilliant. Now that leads me on to Jay's question. So firstly, how do you coordinate sandbox refreshes? So Sam, do you want to start this time around?
Sure, yeah. Obviously as a publicly traded company, we had quite a lot of transaction volume. So I think a consideration in how to handle sandbox refreshes really comes with a number of different caveats where it really depends on the life cycle of your engineering team. Let's say if you don't have an engineering team, right, there's only one or two individuals who are primarily working on workflows and suite scripts. Doesn't even have to be code related. Let's say you just want to be able to test out a new feature, but you want to make sure you do it in sandbox first before, affecting business operations in your production environment. I think the size of the organization matters in deciding how often to do it, whether it should be on a regular cadence or whether the NetSuite admins are the best folks to take that initiative and decide. From my experience, it was the latter because we had a very strong team of about 7 to 8 system administrators, one of which was myself, and it usually fell into my lap to kind of decide on whether we needed a sandbox refresh, whether it was the change that we were trying to test big enough that we needed a sandbox refresh, that we needed to have the most up-to-date information in terms of transactions, or the most recent accounting period to be able to test something out. so what we ended up essentially doing was we had 4 sandboxes, and we kept them refreshed at about a 6-month interval of various ages. So the oldest one being, 2 years old, where a lot of the development work was happening, but we didn't really need the latest transactions. We could just use any transaction, which makes it a lot easier to just say, engineering team, you go in and do your thing here. Whereas if you're testing something for accounting and it's time sensitive, perhaps, then you want to use a sandbox that was just refreshed, maybe 3 months ago or 6 months ago. So I would probably say it depends on a variety of factors, and obviously how many sandboxes you're subscribed to, which of course is an additional add-on and an expense for a business. So it really depends on how large the business is and what's the intention behind keeping that sandbox.
Nice. And moving on to Shalakay.
I'm a huge fan of having a sandbox refresh policy. I have a standard one. If anyone is interested and wants a copy of it, I'm happy to share. But in most of the environments that I have performed as a NetSuite administrator, I encourage at least 2 or 3 sandboxes. And this is the way that I normally organize it. 1 sandbox is for development, usually sandbox 3. Sandbox 2 is for testing. And sandbox 1 is for troubleshooting issues that may occur within the environment. So we have 3 standard sandboxes. Development sandboxes, as Samarth said, this is for development. Refreshes don't need to be very, very frequent. However, I am a proponent of testing not just the development, but testing the deployment of the development. I do this by migrating the development from the actual development sandbox into the testing sandbox, which now not only tests the development, but tests the migration. So it makes sure that I know exactly how I'm going to migrate and that nothing will be missing when I migrate because I have tested that. And then from testing, we deploy into production. Sandbox 1, which is usually my production sandbox, I typically like a refresh schedule of at least 30 days. 30 days, unless there is an issue, in which case I will refresh it more frequently. And that way it is always a close mirror to production. And that's the one that I'm going to use to troubleshoot any issues. If I did a deployment, I'm into production, I'm going to refresh that sandbox because I want that copy of the deployment into that sandbox that mirrors production. And that's the way that I normally like to organize my sandboxes. Of course, for smaller companies, they may have 1 sandbox. We come up with a policy. We tell people, this is how we're going to refresh the sandbox, and we refresh it according to that policy.
Brilliant. And what are your thoughts, Jay? They're quite similar.
I have had the luxury of having access to multiple sandboxes at different times, and I do like the dev, test, QA type setups. The majority of my experiences have just been a single sandbox, and what I've started having some success with is advocating to orient around the release preview times. 2 times a year, you should be going through all of your customizations and doing all of this testing. Let's hold off, not introduce anything new to those test cycles. And now that everything's tested, we should be good to say that the sandbox should replicate production, right? And not feel concerned about refreshing or overwriting anything. And so I've had some mixed success with that, but it's been a good way to just capitalize on the momentum for that release period and be able to say, let's now move forward with a clean slate, if you will.
Brilliant.
If I can interject and add a hack that I'm not sure, I think many people know, but I'm not sure that everyone in the audience might know. The release preview environment also comes with a sandbox, even if you don't have sandboxes. So you can extend your sandbox availability by refreshing the sandbox from the release preview environment. And by doing that, you get another environment for testing.
Nice. Did you both know that as well, or is that news to you?
With release previews, thankfully, we've had that luxury to do that over the 4 sandboxes that we used. I think one quick thing I probably want to add too is to always review those release notes for the release previews, because one, I think everyone should be doing that just to always be aware, especially as an administrator, of what's coming down the line that could potentially have a major impact. Let's say it's a feature that you're using now that's going away, or perhaps there's something that you've been struggling with that now there's a native solution for. I think release notes are a big deal. And something that's, I think, helped me over the years was to kind of classify low, medium, and high risks, and to kind of go through each one of the changes, especially if there's a team of administrators like the one that I had. Then it's always important to establish that. And that even then becomes part of your compliance conversation, where you can show the JIRA ticket that said, look, this is the meeting that we had to review these release notes. We're on this version, and according to us, this is what the risk level was for these changes. So we've kind of seamlessly integrated that into our SOX conversations.
Okay, that's great. And the second question of Jay's was, which apps have you seen business users wanting to supplement or replace NetSuite? So this time we'll start with Shalakay.
Which apps do you see business users wanting to replace?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is answering the question, Jay, and if it's not, please let me know. But some of the commonly used apps that I'm seeing requests for extensions is revenue recognition, right? Revenue recognition, the ARM app within NetSuite. I think it fulfills a very serious requirement in terms of revenue recognition requirements and compliance for subscriptions. However, I am seeing that a lot of business users that I'm working with recently are looking for the next iteration of that. And they are looking for a more robust system for revenue recognition, billing, subscription management. And that they're looking towards companies like Zone & Company that take the structure of advanced revenue management in NetSuite and sort of take it a little bit higher. And so that's one of the requests that I have been seeing come through, recently. I've been getting quite a bit of. Outside of that, of course, standard sales tax seems to be limited in NetSuite, and most of my companies that I work with are using an additional sales tax engine such as Avalara or Vertex. So, that seems to be one of the areas that it's a standard installation almost to have a sales tax engine supplement NetSuite sales tax reporting capabilities. I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure that I did.
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. And Sam?
Yeah, and I think to add to that a little bit on the AP side too, because that was kind of within my purview of late. Quite a lot of times the AP solution does not suffice in NetSuite. It's good to be honest about those kind of things, because NetSuite is great at certain things and NetSuite is also not so great at certain things. And depending on the scale of your company and the number of transactions and the complexity of the environment, you just might need an off-the-shelf solution that integrates really well with NetSuite and ends up pushing the transactions to NetSuite at the end of the day in the way that you want it. So applications like Bill.com work great on the AP side. And even something called Nolan Cash Application, Nolan ABR, works really well for applying cash and being able to do bank statements and reconcile the bank. So especially on the AP side, I feel, I think there's a lot of scope for improvement for the built-in solution. And I think a lot of other companies do it in a very modern way, where, not only are approvals taking place seamlessly without the need for a NetSuite license, but just accessing those invoices, looking at the approval chain, and ultimately just syncing the desired transaction to NetSuite becomes the ideal solution.
Great. And Jay, would you like to answer your own question?
I'd say accounts payable does sound commensurate with what I've seen of NetSuite assuming you're going to log in, click this button and click this button after you key something in, but with bills and other financial transactions coming from all over the place. Yeah, I agree. Having a networked platform for AP makes sense. I think the greasiest wheels that I've heard in my organizations tend to come from sales. There's sort of the baseline domestic model car with CRM and sales management, but of course the salesperson wants a Ferrari version to be able to really present a good deal or something. So I think that's where I've seen the most requests for, hey, do you think we can integrate this or get this or that? Which turns around into just a customized quote that someone can just key in 30 seconds. But
Brilliant. I guess just kind of adding to that question or taking it further, yeah, I'd be quite I'd be quite curious to understand what would be the one modification or adjustment that you'd make to NetSuite if there was just one thing. I'll start with Jay this time.
In general, at all?
Yeah.
I have to think about this because it's so perfect.
Yeah, we'll come back to you. Sam, do you wanna go first?
Sure. I think over the years, one thing that I've always wanted to improve, actually a couple of things, but one that really is close to me because usually the requests come to me and I have to kind of figure out a solution or a way forward for it. NetSuite support could be a lot better. It's not. And I think a lot of people share that frustration that those individuals who might be looking at your tickets or your support requests could be more knowledgeable about the platform and also the turnaround times and what potential solutions they offer. A lot of times we've had to kind of stall initiatives or just leave them at the end of the day because the response that we got from NetSuite for something that we were able to clearly demonstrate was incorrect was just not satisfactory. And I think, yeah, the quality of support, the quality of the individuals providing the support could be better, I think, if I had to choose one. And then a more minor one is probably the fixed asset module. It works very well, but not great.
Okay, no, really good answer. Shalakay?
The one that I get most frequently and the one that frustrates me the most is the web services log only storing for 21 days. And if anyone on this call has solved this problem, I have tried scripting the web services log to store it into a custom record. I have tried a million different ways from Sunday to get web services logs beyond 21 days. And I have not been successful. I've submitted multiple support tickets that went nowhere. So if any of you have solved that problem, that I would love to have an offline conversation with you to determine how you were able to capture that. But that is my biggest frustration, and it comes up very, very often for me.
Yeah, the way Sam was smirking there, it feels like he's got the answer for you potentially.
No,
Well,
unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that because I've had that same frustration. A lot of times we've wanted to look back on a failed transaction or perhaps even just validation for SOX purposes to show that the transaction synced correctly and the fields that were synced and who modified it. Because the result we were seeing in the system notes were contradictory to what we were saying. So a lot of times we wanted to go back and pull the web services log and just weren't able to get to that. So I think one potential solution we've figured out, not necessarily in NetSuite, is we've had to write some custom code in just our own repository that shows when a process gets kicked off. And we're able to retain the logs in that way much longer because it automatically fires off an email notification for which we use NetSuite for. So, we have a log that way that shows when the process got executed, what process it is, and we have a conversation with the auditors that, they know that, okay, if this process is running, that means invoices are syncing at month end. If this process is running, that means AP was closed. So we've made it a little bit easier, but yeah, built-in functionality, I think there's still some work to be done.
Awesome. You've had some time now, Jay. Have you got an answer?
Yes. Have a web responsive version of the UI for mobile. There is a mobile app, doesn't quite have the same type of functionality with buttons and with the menus that are available. But then on a phone or on a tablet, there's a lot of like zooming and scrolling that's required to see everything in NetSuite. So not just for myself, but for other people that I've spoken to in a 24/7 type environment, checking on something really quick would be helpful to have a more effective layout adaptation for the UI.
Yeah, that's great. And last question, there'll be many people listening to this from different backgrounds and different stages within their career, but you all kind of started off at similar levels as NetSuite admin, and you've been successful working your way up throughout the career path. If you were to start again and you were looking at yourself starting as a NetSuite admin, what advice would you give yourself? And we'll start with Jay.
Despite studying business, I spent a lot more time learning the NetSuite platform than learning some of the organizational, institutional frameworks that are required into making NetSuite work for everybody. So I'd say early on, look for mentorship and look for ways that you can get input on sort of like a meeting after the meeting with somebody that you can ask what's going on behind the scenes, so you can grow your soft skills better.
Brilliant. And Shalakay?
I agree with what Jay has said. It is very important that as admins that we get from behind the computer and really interact and face-to-face with people. Early in my career, I had one of my mentors encourage me to really go to every department within the organization and try to really understand what they're doing and map it to NetSuite. Unfortunately, I did not listen at the very beginning, but I eventually got there. I mean, he was very patient with me. Thank you, Charlie, if you're listening. But it's really comfortable behind the laptop, and it's very difficult to really grasp the way that the organization really functions and how each department interacts with each other. And it's easy as an admin to favor finance. I still favor finance, right? It's easy to just think about finance, but it takes the entire organization to make it run, and everyone needs to depend on the ERP system. It is the heartbeat of the company. So we need to understand all of their needs and requirements and be able to satisfy those needs effectively.
Brilliant, that's some great advice. And lastly, Samarth?
I think to expand on that point, it was very well put. I think the advice that I would probably give anyone who's starting out is to just think about the business more, right? Think about how the business is actually functioning, the company that you're working for, how are they generating revenue? How is that fitting into the overall picture of NetSuite? NetSuite is going to be one of the applications that are going to be in use at any given point in time. It's not going to be the be all and end all. So you also need to know what other applications are working in conjunction with NetSuite to then fully utilize NetSuite to be able to elevate that into another application that is relied on as a source of truth. And more importantly, if you're in a public company, it better be your source of truth, because otherwise you're going to have uncomfortable conversations. So, I think it's important as administrators to always think about the larger picture of, if someone locks you in a room and says, how does your company make money, right? Are you going to be in a good position to answer that? If they tell you in a walkthrough, can you walk me end to end how this works? Are you a good enough subject matter expert to be able to say, this is what happens when a person clicks on something, and to have that authority? I think it just takes enough time, but it also has to have a more holistic view of the business itself to say, and to even sometimes challenge, if an external opinion is saying, no, that's not how it works. Let me correct you there, right? And to get to that level, it takes a lot of time, but ultimately it also takes knowledge about the business to then make you a good NetSuite administrator.
Awesome. Yeah, some really great advice. Is there anything else that anyone would add to that?
No,
No?
I think
Perfect.
Samar nailed it.
Nailed it. Awesome. Brilliant. Well, that's a wrap. Time just flew by there, to be honest. I just saw that. That was amazing. Really appreciate you guys. Thank you again for coming on, sharing your insights and really adding some value to the NetSuite community. I hope you feel that some value's been bestowed upon you guys as well. Yeah, I'm really happy that I could connect you, and I hope that you guys stay connected after this call also. Now, if anyone's watching this and they're interested in featuring in a future episode, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn at Dominic Taylor, or email dominic.taylor@amicusjobs.com. Always looking for people within the NetSuite space to come on board. But that's it. That's NetSuite Administration Best Practices. It's been great, and I look forward to hosting another one very soon. Thank you guys again.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for having me.
All right. Take care, guys. Have a good evening.
Bye
You
now.
too. Bye.
Bye.